Howdy, hackers, and welcome to another episode of FairLight TV. Today, we bring up one of the topics we've done a number of times, interviewing one of the real legends, and this time it's one of the real legends. One of the persons starting the C64 scene, the absolute pioneers of the C64 scene. He then went on to be one of the pioneers of the Amiga scene, went into sort of hiding from public eye, and then returned with CCS 64. I am talking about Per Håkan Sundell, PHS of Computer Brain's cracking service. This one is going to be legendary. Over to PHS. Hello and welcome, Per Håkan Sundell, and let's start with the name. So you were known to the scene as PHS, Per Håkan Sundell, but if I look at more your current publication, you sort of dropped P, so you're only Håkan. Please elaborate so I know how to address you properly.
Yeah, so my sort of main name is actually Håkan, so it's a sort of the given name that people usually say. But my full name is Per Håkan Sundell, and it might be that when you look at people with similar names, that there are quite a few actually. So sometimes I even have to add the P also. So there is an old professor in USA that I sometimes actually get mixed up with.
Okay.
So there, and even in Sweden, I think that in Sweden, even Per Håkan Sundell is also, I think, there is a person with the same name born the same year.
What?
Yes. So it's more common than you think.
Okay, and just so we clarify this, you are really, really old because you're like 3 months older than I am. So then you have to be really, really old.
Yeah, I'm born in 1968.
Yeah, so am I. So am I. I'll go with Håkan then because it's a bit more convenient for like fluent addressing here. So you were the founder of one of the pioneering groups that pioneered the C64 scene, you pioneered the Amiga scene, and then you're also the founding father of the CCS 64 emulator, which was, to the best of my knowledge, the first cycle exact emulator ever available.
Thank you.
So and I have this theory that there are a number of people who sort of join a scene and then spend their time there, and that becomes their comfort zone, and I am one of those. But whereas there are a number of people that went to the C64 really early, pioneered it, and then moved to the Amiga and pioneered it, you were more into it from the pioneering standpoint than the actual love of the C64 as a platform.
Yes, really.
Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, I think so. And also to add some details there. So in fact, I mean, I'm not the sort of I'm a co-founder of the Computer Brains Cracking Service group. So to be really honest, Ole Rivenoja was the real founder of Computer Brains, but I joined like 6 months later, actually. So and then we also changed the name to CCS. So he sort of founded the name Computer Brains, but the real sort of cracking and the real group started with me when I joined.
And Computer Brain, when it was Ole, was it just Ole, or did you have any? Was there any additional member, or were you the first recruited member?
Yeah, so I was sort of the first that yeah, joined and we create together a real group. So before that, it was only Ole actually, and he didn't use that name in a really official sense. Sort of, it was just sort of his name that he called himself in some sense. Yeah.
And we are talking 1983, and the machine was released in Sweden in 1983. So you were
Yes.
really early to actually get the physical machine, and and you joined in '83. So he must have gotten it like the first day it was released in Sweden.
Yeah, he was really early. Yes, yeah. When he found the name, I didn't really have a Commodore 64 for myself. I actually started with the Commodore VIC-20 before that.
Mm.
It was on the Commodore VIC-20 that I learned machine code actually. So I didn't really crack programs on the VIC-20 because it was not really a way, but I reshaped programs on the VIC-20 actually. And then I joined with Ale that had similar competences, and I joined Ale because we were poor in those days, and we traded games. That's the reason. So he traded game together.
I have more on like groups and handles and all of that, but there is when I read the interview, I think it's in Medias Res interview where you referenced Ale's father being sort of heavy on alcohol.
Yes.
And this was in '83. If you have I mean, and you were really young, so I'm not. You say you were poor, but and Ale's father being heavy on alcohol, that's typically not the people with the most money. How could he afford that?
So Ale had even for more or worse background in economics than me. But he had a similar way of funding. So he also was on holidays he was selling newspapers and so on and the same. So because we didn't have money backed up from home, we actually made our own money. So we used that money to buy things, and that's the reason why that then we also we want to have the games, and the games were really expensive. So that's the reason.
And there are a number of really interesting stories around you and Ale's father and Ale's father. Yeah, and you can read that in Medias Res. We're not picking up that, but for me here, I mean, groups and handles and all of that, where did you pick that up? Was there any influence from somewhere, or just forming groups? That wasn't even a thing back in 1983. You were pioneering that aspect as well.
Yeah, sort of, but there were groups before. I mean, you had maybe I don't remember exact name, but this cracking service was from somewhere else. There was some other group that were really early there.
Yeah, you had like a Berlin cracking service, a German cracking service. That seems to be sort of the thing.
Exactly. So the cracking service was sort of borrowed, but Computer Brains was from Ale.
And your work distribution here, I mean, it seems like you were both coding and
yeah, we were both doing everything. So like I mean, similar to the groups in the beginning were quite small. So I mean, some of them were only one person and some were two persons. So it was quite common in the beginning there that the groups were really like small. And sort of it began with at least for us with trading games, and because we wanted to trade games, we had to crack them.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the driving forces are different, but and if I look at the history again, there is a reference to Mr. Music, Asshole, very mature handle, and the Plow, and it seems like the Plow and Mr. Music is actually the same person.
No, no. So the Plow is a different guy, and I'm not sure that I should give the full name, but in Sweden he was called Plogen, and it was because the way he looked in some ways, and that's not really kind. So that's also sort of typical for Ale. He didn't sort of filter his speech, sort of. So he said things that sometimes could really hurt people. But yeah, so the Plow, he was even older than us. I think he is born like 64, I think. So he's 4 years older, and he doesn't come from the same city. So, but and he was sort of the more professional guy among us, and he was also sort of trading games and so on, but he was more focused on music. and the other guy was more like a friend that joined for some year, and he was like learning. He was more like electronics guy, and he wanted also to learn to crack, so more or less.
But it looks like you did 90% of everything. It might be that Ole did a lot of the thing in the background, but you were the one that had your name on the final release.
Yeah, exactly. So in the beginning we were doing sort of equal, but after a while, Ole more focused on sort of the role that the group needs to have. That you have to have a sort of spokesperson, and I was more sort of the back office.
Okay.
I did things in behind sort of.
And people send you originals for cracking, but there is a story about you going into a shop wanting to quality assure the game before buying it, and you actually cracked it in the shop.
Yes.
Was that a regular thing, or did you do that more than once?
We did it twice actually there, yeah. And the idea was from Ole, because I told that Ole he really had some ideas. And he didn't have any borders at that time, so I was like, first reluctant, can we really do that? Of course we can do that. Because
you can always try. What is the worst thing that can happen? They can throw you out, and that's it.
Exactly, but he had been there before, and he sort of recognized the situation, and one of the person that worked there, she was not really that talented, so he probably understood that we could actually do anything there. And he was really like free spoken, so he just went up to the desk there and asked about do you have some new games, and so, can we look at the games? Of course. Can we try the games? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So they had it set up with a disk drive, and you can. Was this a tape game or a disk game, or?
It was disk games. Yeah.
Tape would take too long, I guess.
Yeah, they had tape games as well. Maybe we cracked that as well, but we were more focused on disk games, and we were prepared. So I know that Ole, he had a plastic bag full with stuff. He had empty disks, of course, and then he had some disk with some special programs. So he had like this, I think, fast hackcam and other kind of disk copy programs.
Okay.
And of course, we also had our own machine code monitor, of course, on the cartridge. Yeah.
So inserting the cartridge so you could quality assure it properly. Yeah.
Exactly. So they went up to and asked us what we're doing, and then Ole he directly said, we are looking at the code because we want to buy check if the game has a good code, because we have a good code in the game that we want to buy, of course.
It's not the result of the code that is relevant. It's actually the quality of the code. Exactly. Yeah. Well, it has to be somebody rather naive in the shop, but you managed to pull it off. So hat off for that.
Yeah. So I was like thinking we are soon getting into be kicked off forever, but it's like we survived.
And you referenced your machine code monitor. I guess this is the CCS mon, which is the first thing I also used when Gollum asked me to do cracking.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah.
Is that something you developed from scratch, or is it something you is it based on Hesmon or one of the other sort of prominent cartridges at the time?
So when I was had my birthday, I think, and so on, then my father actually bought me Hesmon. So that was a gift from my father, Hesmon. So it is inspired by Hesmon, but it's coded from scratch, and I know that I spend a lot of time with the assembler and disassembler, and that was sort of the hard part. But I was quite proud of it, because I think that my code was quite shorter than the code that in Hesmon, which also then enabled us to have a lot of other stuff in the monitor. So we really squeezed a lot of stuff inside of this 8K.
Yeah, and one of the things you could do is if you slam restore, it would store a copy of the area 0 to 800 and put it under the IO area. So,
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a freezer cartridge because it doesn't have any RAM, so it doesn't back up to RAM, but it uses one of the areas of the memory which is rarely used, or at least was not used at the time. So
it's really, yeah.
Yeah. I have made a reassembly of it, so if you don't have your source code ready, I have it on GitHub. It's a private repository. I can share it with you.
Yeah, really nice. Yeah, thanks.
What kind of assemblers were you using at the time?
So and that's also something that bit special because I mean I'm a self-learned programmer from the beginning, so I didn't have any real formal education programming since or I think it was in the 90s then that I really sort of read otherwise I learned by myself by doing it and read in like computer magazines and so on and also some books as well, but mainly by myself, which meant that this idea with assembler, real assembler, was not really our thing. So I and Ole, we were both in the same way. So we were, I mean, like it's a bit self-plaguing sort of that we were writing really big programs in machine code.
In the machine code monitor?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of things that people did back then that comes across as weird today. Like writing a book on a typewriter. That means that you need to have everything in your head before you start writing it. That's, for me, it's more an iterative process. I really need an assembler, and I need to assemble and test on a like 10-second basis.
Exactly.
I had Macrofire in the beginning, and that was horrible because writing code, and the only way you could assemble, or the way the commands I knew of Macrofire was assembling to disk.
Okay.
So I assembled to disk, loaded my program, tested it, reloaded Macrofire, reloaded my source. It took forever. The iteration between every instance I could try was like minutes, and compare that to the seconds today. But comparing everything to writing long programs in machine code monitor directly, no.
No, that's a really different way of programming. I know, but that was a way in the past, and it started actually with Hesmon there because Hesmon didn't have any assembler, so I had to do that. So CCS is written using Hesmon directly in machine code, and of course you need to have paper and pen. So both Ole and me, we have a lot of notes actually. So we have notes sideways there, and we really appreciate the command called T transfer and the N command that transfer the programs to different addresses because we had to do that quite often, you know.
Well, I mean, one of the old tricks was putting three knobs. So you could insert a JSR if you needed to sort of implement code between something and something else.
Yes.
But I mean, looking at CCSmon, there are rather few of those starting at even pages. That's also one of the classical tricks. If you start writing your stuff in machine code monitor, you start writing on an even page, and then the next routine is on the next even page. So there would be space in between.
Yeah, so of course there were spaces while developing it, but then I cleaned it up, of course.
So you transferred everything to a location, and then it was fine.
Yeah. So the final work cleaned up.
And one of the features of CCSmon was also there was a turbo tape inside it, which is also something you release separately called, of course, PHS Turbo.
Yes.
Is it compatible with something else? Is it one of those Turbo 250 that Mr. Z also did?
Yeah, so it's even before him. So he was also inspired by some other thing there, and the first version I think was somewhere on C100, C1000 something. That it like CD something XX in memory located. So it was inspired by the first turbo tape, and Mr. said and me actually, I think we did it almost on the same time. That we tried to make some more efficient, and also we wanted to have it sort of more available according to memory. So I managed then to transfer it under the D1000 page, under the IU there, and also could select it to also be under the kernel part there. and of course also try to make it smaller, and I also tried also to make it like a footprint that also was sort of stayed after you had run the game.
Mm.
So that's the reason why I managed then to have this sys 3-1, you know.
Mm.
And that managed, and that's often, quite often, it managed to be left when you have run the game, actually.
So does that mean that you had it like in high memory, and what you had down in very low memory was just sort of a bootstrap to launch the high memory, because you couldn't fit it all of it downstairs, down into low memory?
No, so it was partly on the low memory, so actually on the stack, because I realized that most games will not use the full stack. Of course.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of stuff staying resident in C64 memory is a bit challenging, because yeah, it's very limited, and games they typically have access to all of memory and tend to sort of trash everything. But yeah, well, whatever works.
Exactly.
So, and you also had a number of compressors, and for me this is also very, very new, and I'm still amazed that a number of teenagers with no like formal background or formal education of anything, and not reading any compression patents or stuff, could develop stuff. But you had BitOS, Max Short, Screen Short, CCS Special, Executor. What kind of technology? Is that run length encoding, or is it anything more advanced than that?
It's actually the same thing. Yes, it's inspired by other things, but many of the things are directly self-invented also. But they are basically what you call run length encoding and pattern encoding, actually. So it's I mean, it's in the starting there, actually, I think that the reason why we made it a separate program was that we actually found a game that were using it, I think. Mm. And they used it in the game in order to sort of fit more than 64K in the program. Mm. Because you could compress and so on, also a technique that we use ourselves. So we made a standalone. So the first one where we just sort of compressed the sequence of the same byte, that was sort of a standard technique. But then we realized that we also could do other things like in patterns and so on. And there we did more than actually I know is published. So we even managed to compress patterns that were quite uncommon to be able to compress, like a single byte that just repeats in a certain sequence. Mm. So that's the reason why there are special versions. And then BitOS was the Huffman sort of encoding. But there, I myself, and I know also other groups, you know, Huffman coding, if you read the research paper, it's quite advanced. Mm. And it will not fit into sort of the memory bounds that we have on 64. So I myself then also managed to sort of create a simpler version of it. So it's a sort of a simplified version of Huffman, where you just look at the distribution of bytes, actually, I mean, the values. Yep. It's about entropy, and you utilize that entropy is not like random noise, because if you have random noise, it's not possible to compress. But because some characters are more used than others, then you can replace the characters with a shorter bit pattern, actually. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, so that's
Did you have a static tree, or were you building the tree on a runtime?
We have it static, so that's the reason why it's really simplified. So we really have the simplified version. So it's not really sort of scientific. It just works most of the times.
But how? I mean, just knowing that there is such a thing that you could do, where did you pick that up? Because I mean, Huffman is that. Or did you invent it yourself, and it just happened that it was an existing thing?
So I think that that more or less that there were programs available that I could read, but I also read actually a research paper as well, because at that time actually I was studying then at what's it called in English technical program in Sweden here.
Gymnasiet in Swedish, so it's like I mean you couldn't compare it to the American system, but like high school-ish.
Yeah, college sort of high school, college or something. But there had a special project about compression actually. So there I read this Siv Lempel and Huffman papers.
Okay, then you got the inspiration from like real engineers, and you could introduce it to C64 context.
Yeah,
but I mean, you have a very small amounts of data compared to what the specs are written for. So yeah, I tend to. I mean, Huffman run length encoding works absolutely beautiful, and that's sort of a given anytime. And also pattern matching, the sequence crunchers, they also tend to do a really good job. Huffman tends to work better if you have bigger data volume. So the times I've been using Huffman on the C64, it hasn't really been very successful.
No.
Especially not on games. It would be better on stuff like text.
So, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
All right, so going through a few of the other releases, Anti-Ice Pick. Why that? Did you ever use an Ice Pick? Did you have Ice Pick? And that was for you who don't know that's sort of the first freezer cartridge. It was. You can easily tell if it's something is sort of ice pick cracked because it says cracked by ice pick, and there is a little boot file which is I guess 2 blocks, and then the rest of the file is in a separate file that starts with a minus or a dash.
Yeah. And the reason we were quite anti of this ice pick because it's. Both me and Ole was a bit pedantic about our copies, sort of. So we want to have sort of nice copies, nice version of the games. And one of the things that we also used when we were trading were that we were sort of boasting with that our version of the cracked games was shorter than other. And then when you got these ice pick things, the copies were not really nice because they dumped the whole memory of the games, which also then made it a bit more hard to handle on like tape and so on, because you had to divide the game at least into 2 parts, or you had to have a special loader and so on. So it was not really convenient to have like a file of 64K. So and they were really poorly compressed because they were having everything, and they like a small game, like a game that would normally take like 10K would take like 50K with this. So that was one of the reasons, and also because I mean we had and those days we were talking about people like Lamers and so on, and it's like. It didn't have any challenge anymore. So I mean, using ice pick, you crack games not having any knowledge.
Yeah, anyone could do it. Yeah. And guys, so this is one of the roots of the credo of the C64 scene. Single file is better. Yeah. Compressed smaller is better. That proves that you are competent rather than an ice pick user.
Exactly.
Great, and we still sort of honor that today. Fewer files and shorter is still better. Even if you have D64s, you can generate millions of them in seconds, and that's absolutely fine. But it's still shorter is better, and I spend days on stuff to make them shorter.
Really? Okay, cool. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, now we know where that came from. Your own game, Time Zero, and I have several aspects of this. First, it's a game you had really sort of, for the time, advanced stuff. You had digitized sound, your own voice is in there, you open the border, upper and lower, and this is also really early. And then I would also like to discuss like the gaming industry of the time, how you managed to sell it. But let's start with the game itself. It's sort of a space game, right?
Yes, and it's one of the probably hardest games ever created.
I've never played a game that wasn't trained, so I wouldn't know. But
no, so it was inspired by several games that me and Ole were playing at the arcade. We had in Karlstad there was an arcade that also have billiards with pool, and they had arcade games that were playing a lot. And there were some games that were similar to that where you were running like airplane and so on, and running into a sort of a futuristic world that you were running into there and shooting things and so on. So it was inspired by a real arcade game, and we wanted then to sort of make the sort of the technically we wanted to try different techniques that we had developed outside. So Time Series is not really our first game. We had another game before called Century, which we didn't really sell. But the reason why we tried to make and also made Time Series a real game was because I think it was in '85 when we started there. We actually were called by a guy that was selling games in Sweden here, called Christer Lindell something. He was the CEO of CBI, I think it was called, in Eskilstuna, and he was calling us and told us that he was representing a company that was selling games, and he told us, oh, okay, I know who you are, I know that you're cracking games.
Oops.
And then he had a deal and said that, okay, should it be better for you to make games instead of cracking them? Okay, and then we sort of signed a deal there. Okay, let's try that, and we sort of I'm not sure that we had a real contract, but we had sort of a verbal contract, and he sent us stuff. So he sent us then digitizer board and provide and also digitizer sound device and so on, and other stuff. And we had sort of a promise then that if we would be able to make a game, he would be able to sell it. So that's the reason. So we tried quite hard to make a good game there on Time Zero, but it's more beautiful beyond sort of the front. So it's more on the under the surface because the surface is, I mean, the graphics is nothing that we were really talented about. So the talent and some of the graphics are even stolen. So from other games, but most of the graphics are self-made, but not really nice. To be honest.
And this is all coded in a machine code monitor as well.
Yes, and this game is coded in CCS mode completely.
Okay. Okay. Well, one of my I'm throwing one of my my theories around how things developed in Sweden, and given that we didn't really have any professional game development studios, most of the really talented people were sort of attracted to the scene because that is where you could sort of get an outlet for your technical aspirations and your competitive edge. Whereas if you look at in the UK or even to some extent in Germany, you had a gaming industry that would suck up everybody who had like a beta version of a potential games, would be sucked up by the gaming industry and starting to write games rather than cracking games. Yeah, but I mean, there are rather few exceptions. CBI would be one, and then you had Grieve Graphics. To the best of my knowledge, Lars Hård and the other guys, they weren't really cracking games. They just went directly to coding games, but they are a very rare exception.
Exactly.
Up until you had Pinball Dreams appearing from when the silence went gaming, and the rest is history around that. But anything before that were very either going for the scene or very sort of amateuristic from the gaming company's perspective. Yeah, again, so yeah, that wasn't the question, and this is supposed to be a question for you. Would you agree if I make that into a question? Does that sound reasonable?
I think so. I think it's really reasonable. So it was not really sort of a possibility to make games in Sweden at that time. So it was I mean, really far-fetched to do that. And I know that some people actually managed, but now for the average sort of talented programmers and so on the 64, it was not really like easy thing to get into that, but it went more and more. So I know that CBI then they also tried to recruit other people as well. But so now so there were mostly like cracking games that were available.
If there had been like a gaming industry and there was there would be something you could make a living out of, would you have gone into gaming industry if that was like a valid option for you?
Probably, yes. I think so. That at least at that time, when you grow up, you get more sort of a bigger view. But yeah, maybe, probably, yeah.
Possibly. Then it might be lucky because you're probably in a better place than coding games at this point in time, I guess.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, you have somebody like Carl Hörnell who did Velocipede and a few Fungus and a few of the other games. Okay. He's like a very early C64 game developer, but he was selling the games via the UK. So again, it wasn't really possible to sell via one of the companies in Sweden. Do you have any idea of how many copies you sold of the game?
Not really. So I know that also Ale sold the game later himself as well, but it's not like maybe 10,000 something. It shouldn't be more than that.
Yeah, but that's still a lot for given the number of C64s around in 1985. It's not. I mean, out of the 17 million sold, a very small share is sold in Sweden, and a number of those would still be sold after 1985. So I think that's a massive hit, I would say, from that perspective. Okay, so in the crack of 1942, one of the arcade conversions, it seems that Ale has faded and CCS was basically you.
Which year was that?
Yeah, I didn't make any note of that. But let's say in the sort of it has to be like 87 or potentially even going to 87.
Yeah, in 87, CCS was basically me. Yeah.
So and were you were collaborating with anybody at the time, or who were the prominent others that you were interacting with, your friends and enemies? It seems like Swedish Cracking Crew wasn't one of your biggest fans, so they were not a fan of anybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. So I didn't have anything to do with them. So it's only all that had relation. But I know that he had a really sort of bad relation, and he was telling me that they were not really honest when trading games. So I think that was the whole thing, that he sent stuff and lost money and so on, and blamed them for that. And then he had some ideas of getting his revenge. You know?
Yeah, well, I mean, oops, I'm getting an echo here. Looking at the SCC, sorry. Back at the time, there was a controversy around a few of the games. Sigma 7, which is said to be just a copy of the West Coast Cracker, or even the Wasp one. And Soldier 1 was also a game which is said to be released by somebody else, and they just took the version and smacked their own intro onto it, so which is beyond bad. Yeah, I'm going to have a talk with Henrik I think his name is, at one point in time, and we can dig into this, but I'm not asking you more on this. So it seems like 1987 you stopped your C64 activity and went all Amiga.
Not completely. So I went an Amiga as soon as the A500 was released. So I was sort of one of the first ones that got an Amiga 500 in Sweden, and I also was looking at the 8000 when it came, but when the A500 came, then I really switched to Amiga. But I still managed a bit on 64, and I know that I also sort of wrote some programs and inspired. So I for example, I think that Time Crunch, or on other way, that I transferred some programs on. So there were some at least overlap there, but quite small.
Okay, and it's one of the comments I have also from one of the interviews is that you said that originally you only had a tape drive, so you worked using tape drive, but eventually moved to disk.
Mhm.
And the key question is, have you preserved your C64 discs?
Yes, my discs are at home. I can show them if you want later, so they take a photo of them if you want to see them.
No,
And
no,
I think
have you made digital copies of it, so they're not suffering from digital rot?
no, so the discs I have made copies some years ago. I
Okay.
did this one actually on the Amiga. I made some, and I think that some of them are released on Brain's website. There are some stuff there that are transferred from Amiga to some D64 file format there.
Right, because I mean, you would be having access to a number of things, not only your own thing, but stuff from others that you received from others, which
Yes.
might easily have been sort of lost in time unless they are picked from your specific discs.
Yeah, but I think I tried some years ago on the disc and there weren't a problem. But on the sort of 5 and 1/4 inch disc
Oh.
or no problem. But the 3.5 inch disc from Amiga, they were lost several years ago, even 10 years ago, they were lost. So the sort of stability of the information is much longer on the older formats.
Yeah, well, the density of the data on the disk is they are
That's
it's
much.
easier to make it work if it's less dense.
Yeah, and the tapes actually work today, so they are really stable.
Yeah. Key here was that the stuff that you have copies of isn't lost in time. That's all I want to ensure. I don't care how you do it. It's just that if it's ported to a modern system and there is a proper cloud backup or whatever, so it's not lost, then I'm all good.
Yeah, and I tried also to be more sort of archive guide to I think I uploaded some of the C64 scene sites also. I try to do that.
Cool, cool. And if you need any help, let me know because there are a number of people whose participation in the scene is basically working with preservation. They take stuff, they sort it, they extract the relevant parts and isolate them so they are separate the releases and all of that. It's so that's sort of a separate profession you can have in the current scene, being a preserver.
Okay.
Yeah, look, yeah. Let's talk about that offline. But that would be a general thing for anybody watching as well. If you have discs where you might have stuff that nobody else has, and please ensure that that isn't lost because it's our heritage, and we want to ensure that it's available.
Really, yeah.
So let's talk Amiga then, and I'm more like a lame Amiga guy, which means that my level of questions would be more shallow. I'm sorry about that, but one of the things that is quite clear looking at your release catalog on the Amiga is that you sort of brought the C64 credo. A number of others just patched away the loader and then the game that was on one disk is still on one disk, whereas you took it, you packed it, and you put multiple games on a disk and probably with a menu in front of it and more like the C64 way of doing it, single filing stuff and crunching stuff properly already from start.
Exactly. And I think that was the key to success for me as well, because I was both I was very early in the A500 sort of when it came, and I had sort of maybe an advantage because I rewrote some tools from 64 scene to
Yeah.
Amiga. So I quite early also wrote my own machine code monitor CCS on Amiga. This monitor was never released, and it was never released on a cartridge. So it was only software only.
Mm. But please tell me that you didn't write stuff in machine code monitor on the Amiga, or
Uh,
or
I did it very little, but sometimes I did it, but and of course the Amiga 68000 assembler is a bit more difficult also to because and to really be honest, on the 64 sometimes we didn't even write in traditional machine code. I mean, we were so sort of deep into coding that we could write code in hex code actually. So I had it in mind, all the opcodes in mind, so I could write programs directly in hex.
And the opcodes is one thing, but all the addressing modes, you need to keep separating which one is also. I know like 10 that are very natural, especially for hunting for patterns. That I mainly use it for that. I'm searching in the C64 memory for something that does this, but I only need to know 10, and I would never do that coding on that.
But it's really simple because I mean the second character, I mean you know AD is LDA absolute, and then you also have AC and so on, and A9 and AE. So there are versions. So it's, I think it's usually that like on the, maybe I don't remember now, but I think at A9 on the end there is like index with, and the other one is, I think index with X and so on, and so it's a pattern actually. That's a pattern.
Okay, so the first one tells which instruction it is, and the second one tells sort of the variant it is. So
more or less, the 5 first bits tell which instruction, and the last 3 bits sort of tell what index or mode sort of. Yeah.
And those are always the same.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Not really always, especially on this undefined opcodes. They're a bit trickier.
They become really tricky. Yeah. So A9 is immediate, and AD is using an address, so a 16-bit address. On the PC, you started working with others. The collaboration with Def Jam. Here it becomes a bit blurry if CCS is like a subgroup of Def Jam or if it's a collaboration, but also Def Jam, it seems like Ron Birk, Ilskuru seems to be the driving force of Def Jam here. So
exactly, yeah. So I collaborate mainly with Ron first, and then also get knowledge also of the other people as well. Maybe there Ulf Gehenna in Gävle. Def Jam. So now I didn't really formally join because I also sort of tried to make CCS its own sort of brand.
But and again, not recruiting anyone. You were still CCS. Who are the other members then of CCS? Was it now only you, or?
Yeah, so I mean, all in some sense was also a member because he was a founder, but he was not really that active. So I met all sometimes there during that time, and maybe didn't really participate, but at least he followed sort of the scene and stuff, and looked at the games and so on.
And he had an Amiga as well. So
yes, yeah.
Was he ever coding on the Amiga, or is that C64 only?
No, I don't think that he really did something really professional or something that you really could release. But yeah, he at least did some sort of hacking on it in some sense. It did more than the games. And also the other guy that was called Asshole, he was coding on Amiga as well. So I and Asshole actually were making a new game, and we started to make together. He made a game design engine, actually a whole engine and design tools. There first we did it on the 64, and then we also did it on the Amiga. So, but this game was never finished. But it should be like the game Terra Cresta or something like that shooting up game.
Mm-hmm. Well, that happened a number of times. People spending too much time on the engine and the tools rather than writing the actual game, when resulting in great tools that no games were ever used for. But
really, really sad, actually, to be honest.
yeah.
Spend
So
time and waste.
Ron, was he a classmate of Sultan, Mr. Z?
Yes, he was, yeah.
And so you know Sultan also from back in the days?
So I mean, you know, in the headquarters of CCS at Ale's apartment, when I came there quite often, I mean, Ale had Mr. Z in the phone, and then said that he was trying to make his compressor a bit faster, and then Ale said, "Oh, here's Håkan, talk to him." So, and I told him, oh, "Okay, I can make it even faster." And so we were like, really.
There is this this site by Gleb who published old letters, and there is a collection from Honey in 1001 Crew, where he had like a rather big correspondence with Sultan on making faster decompressors and more efficient. But it seems Sultan is very adamant of having them really fast.
Yes, he was, yeah. So we were talking about different techniques, like making on the 0 page and so on, and this decompressor and so on, and how to make it there. So we were sort of competing, I and it's said.
So that was sort of sliding back to the C64. Sorry for my passion for that platform, but so. There is a release called Placid, 100 of the most remembered C64 game tunes, and for this you had to make an emulator. First of all, you needed to make a 6502 emulator, but you also need to make a SID emulator, which is a lot trickier than making a 6502 emulator. So let's get into the emulation part here. It seems like you started already sort of emulating VIC-20. There is also a comment from you somewhere where you did sort of VIC-20 emulation, but this is of course a lot more advanced. Emulating the SID is that's high-tech science. Take us through with Placid.
I don't really think it's high tech, but okay, I can explain. So on the 100 most remembered 64 tunes, I mean, to be really honest, the emulation of the SID chip is quite a cheating thing, to be honest, compared to what I've done later. But it sounded really nice, to be honest. But it's not really that accurate. But it sounded really nice. And one of the things that maybe made it a success was that I made a special trick to emulate the sort of the 4-channel, and I then investigated different players by different music artists like Martin Galway and so on. So I created some sort of extension on the IE register on the D4XX registers. So I added some extra registers in order to enable the sort of emulated SID chip to have abilities to replay like special of these digitized artifacts and so on. But that also we had then to also to rewrite the programs themselves. So we had to rewrite the songs in some manners there. So that was one of the hard parts also with the 100 most remembered 64 tunes that I and Ron, we had to manually then rewrite many of the songs because they couldn't really be used directly with the emulator.
Okay, then emulation might be simpler, but then you had to invest a lot of time in rewriting instead. So I was under the impression you can feed any song to it and it will play it nicely, but
later and plays it like free channel things you can directly feed them. Yeah, you can do it. Unless they are doing something really nasty, like if I mean. Some of the things that, for example, 64 dependent, like doing something with the IO page, the 0 page register 1 or 1 there, then you can have problems because if you have bank switching, that will not. But standard sort of free channel music, those we can run directly.
Well, bank switching, why would you do that? Picking up song data from kernel, or why would you do bank switching?
It might be that on the game, it might be that the music notes are stored under the IU page. You know, yes,
okay.
yeah. So on later games, I mean that they used old tricks, you know.
Super. So sort of the end of your Amiga period. You faded away, or got where did you focus your interest after your Amiga years? Is that when you went professional and started studying on university, or?
So I mean, I think that I made things on Amiga like until '94. So the later years of my Amiga sort of career in the scene was more or less spent on making things work, or games work nicely with my hard disk. So I had hard disk at the time, and I was really a bit annoyed with all of these Amiga games that were like on 10 disks and so on. And then I want to have these games working perfectly on the hard disk instead. So that also kind of emulation, and then I also worked like until like in the beginning of the '90s there, a lot also with emulations. So you know, the Commodore VIC-20, there also I actually made a whole emulator on Amiga that worked really well, but I didn't release it. And there also, as I usually do, I also tweaked a lot with graphics. And in the '94, what happened there was that then I actually moved to PC actually. So I got the PC in '94, and then I started together was with the Flow. I made sort of the first demos and sort of assembly stuff on the x86 platform. So I did some sort of code programs and so on, and then I didn't really compete there. So I was following this scene, you know, this 4K demos and so on that were I more or less just sort of following it.
Yeah, I don't have any documentations of your any potential releases you have on the PC, but did you release anything of significance on the PC that we should mention here?
No, not really, and anything that were really that important. More or less, just sort of small chunks of code like this Starfield animation and so on. These kind of things, or things that you could use for intros. So more or less sort of basic code stuff for making intros on the PC. So like for the VGA graphic and so on, and also made some sort of special programs for making different VGA modes that were not really traditional. So I used this kind of stuff also on Amiga, that I were quite interested in how to sort of tweak the CRT monitors at that time. So it began on Amiga there where you actually had the possibility to make a different frequency on the signal.
You might want to have a look at one of the C64 demos, which is a very recent one. You start it, and then it launches in the disk drive, and then you take a specialized serial cable and you connect that serial cable to a CRT monitor, and it plays directly from the disk drive via the serial cable, using that as a video cable.
Oh, that's really cool.
I'll show you that one. It's absolutely amazing.
Amazing, really. Yeah, that's
Okay, so you did your master thesis in 1995. I graduated in 1994, so you took your studies seriously, and it took your year longer than it did for me. But this was on emulation, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And what was the name of the project that you eventually released as part of that master thesis?
CCS 64.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my impression here is that it's the first cycle exact one. Frodo by Christian Bauer was the emulator that everybody was using up until CCS64 came about, and Christian Bauer also is the author of this legendary Vic deconstruct article, which is telling every dirty trick on the what the Vic can do. But you took it one step further, I guess, because getting to cycle exact is absolutely needed if you want to do stuff like opening the border and do a lot of those really funky Vic tricks, VSP and stuff. So if emulating the SID for me is black magic, emulating the Vic is well beyond black magic. Do take us through that. What is the process of emulating the Vic?
So emulating the Vic is probably the most difficult thing I ever have done. So really honest.
Thank you. Oh, I'm relieved. And you didn't do it in a machine code monitor.
No, not really. So there, it's the assembler.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So it's no, so it's really difficult, and it's not deterministic, to be really honest. So and there are different versions of the Vic chip. Oh. So the Vic chip have different additions, and so they have changed some stuff there, and the reason why it's changed also is a bit cryptic. I think is because of the technique and the electronics, like on the transistors also. So there are a lot of stuff there that are sort of not really, they have never really been documented from Commodore. So it's really a magic art, to be honest.
Yeah, but I mean, if you use anything that is documented by Commodore, it would be rather boring. But it's the things that aren't documented that sort of that's where the magic happens.
Yeah. Also, for example, the sprites. I mean, the sprites behave. In so overall they behave quite sort of reasonable, but there are some special things when you if you expand and so on at the right cycle there, then stuff happens that are not really nice.
Or could be really nice.
Really, it's a sort of really useful for making demos. But sort of the idea behind when you make an emulator, it's not really nice to have this kind of exceptions. You have everything clean, and now you find, okay, here is not clean.
No, you need to make exceptions and exceptions and exceptions because the Vic works so weirdly, and you needed to test it on multiple programs to ensure that you capture all the weird corner cases that people manage to take advantage of, I guess. So you, at the time, it was an absolutely amazing product, and but it's still sort of one man's work. If you compare it to Vice today, it developed really slow, and it's developed by multiple people. But on the other hand, one of the benefits of that is that you can have new forces bringing in, and you can have a continuous development, whereas it seems, if I look at this correctly, the last update you did was in 2015.
No, I released also some patches lately. I think that had some release some years ago, but it's not really a major change. More or less, yeah, that patches make it run on newer platforms like Windows 10 and so on. So
okay.
More on that part.
Compile the code base for new platforms, or
yeah. So for example, I'm not really that sort of I'm not so much time to spend for example on like adding cartridges. So there I know that there's lax. So I'm not really focusing on sort of on that kind of expansion anymore. But I'm working on worked the last years actually on the greater features. So I'm writing actually right now on a bigger thing, but that's really a larger step to make that, and that's maybe I shouldn't relieve it, but reveal what I'm doing. But I wanted to have a really good architecture in the emulator for making it possible to run everything backwards, cycle-wise.
I mean, there are, I mean, shortcomings of ICE as well. There is no RAM expansion unit support in the machine code monitor, and so that would be like a position you can take, to have the machine code monitor also support RAM expansion unit, and but I mean, and if this is a good place to throw in suggestion, monitor in a separate window, I think that's also a beneficial thing. Plug-in structure. There is something called ICU, which is basically Frodo with viewers of the memory outside a separate window. That's also something I really miss in Vice. I would like to have some sort of plug-in structure. And any plan to release it at open source, or making the source available, or this is your project?
I tried it several times actually. So I had several people that were signing up, and I had the repository also. So I tried it twice actually. But I gave like I had 4 or 5 persons every time, and they were really skilled programmers, but it seemed that they didn't really catch up with my kind of coding, or I had no idea, because they never delivered anything.
Yeah. But sometimes you just want the source to see what's behind the scene, and then, but actually contributing is a lot more difficult, and that threshold for getting to that is really difficult, I guess. So
might be. So I was a bit I didn't really.
This became sort of a cliffhanger. There might be updates to CCS 64.
Yeah.
Yes. We're really looking forward to that.
But it's more focused on my kind of ideas than bigger outside. So I told you, my sort of where I focus, or more like on the underneath sort of, and the nice thing I would like to have, and to be like on the past. I would like to have the best possible debugger, and that's the reason why I would like to be able to have a W command that has the backwards option. To step backward, because when I crack games and so on, I mean, you have a breakpoint, and then when breakpoint, you would, I mean, step forward is nice, but step back is even nicer.
Right. So what you have in Vice is the CHIS, computer history. And so you give the argument 100, and then you see the last 100 instructions the CPU has executed. So yeah, and that's one of the things that happens to crackers, especially I don't know on the Amiga or on any other platform, but on C64 you tend to want to see this is executing something that looks really interesting. How did it get here? I don't get it. It's getting here, but it's actually really confusing. How?
Oh yeah, exactly. Why? Yeah. Why are we getting here?
So moving, just concluding here, your real life. You are an associate professor, and you run your own company together with somebody else called Parallel Scalable Solutions. Could you give us a bit of a background on your academic life and your commercial life, and how they coexist?
Yeah, so it's not so much commercially in real sense. It's what you call a spin-off. So the whole idea was from my PhD project, when I had to do my PhD on Chalmers. So we created a library and for parallel computing in C++ and C, and we wanted to take that further on. And the reason was that while I published the first articles there on these state structures, we got a really not huge, but we got really good attention from companies in the East Coast in US that were working on the trading industry, which is a bit fascinating. So they were then really interested in, because in trading, time is money, sort of. And
microseconds make all the difference. So people need their data centers to sit really close to the trading platforms with good fiber connections and the fastest CPU you can possibly buy. So you can be like 2 nanoseconds before your competitor, and then you could buy or sell. And that's a lot of money in that. That's absolutely incomprehensible. But yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
I've seen that as well.
Exactly. So that is the reason why sort of my skills were interesting for them there, because I had made some data structures there that were I mean, in modern, say, thread safe, but they also had some other properties like what they call formally then lock free and so on, and they really would they had benefit from these kind of properties. So in the beginning there, we actually before we actually formed sort of the company, a bit after that, we actually had some sort of offers there that and not so much money, but like 50,000 crowns or so in Swedish and so on. And the nice thing was that our code then were really used then also in real things.
And so this is that a DLL you sell? The package you sell, is that like a DLL or?
DLL or lib sort of, yeah.
Cool. And you are based in Karlstad, right? But looking you have some sort of footprint also here in the Stockholm area.
It's probably not me.
Okay, it might be the other.
Yeah, it might be the other. Yeah.
Okay. So you are Karlstad. So you're back in the roots.
Right now, I'm actually in Borås. So yeah.
Okay, that's for me. That's still very close to Karlstad, but how far is that? Is it like 50 kilometers or?
No, it's more.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So sorry about being a bit vague on the geography here in Sweden. Håkan, this has been absolutely amazing, and we need to wrap up because people tend to be thinking that an hour and a half is absolutely fine, but if you ask them to stay longer than that, then they might drop off. So this has been super interesting, and it's super fun to meet you. And whenever you are in Stockholm, do ping me, and I would for sure like to meet you in person. Super. Thanks.
Thank you.
Per Håkan Sundell, PHS of Computer Brains Cracking Service, one of the real legends of the C64 scene. If you think I have been around forever, he was before my time. He moved Amiga before I started on my C64. That's how pioneering he was. Humble thanks, Per Håkan, for participating, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I sure did, and I'm hoping that you would like it as well. See you hopefully next week. Bye-bye.